represent Abia Central, arise to move a motion on the rising incident of suicides amongst Nigerians. And I have here 15 names of distinguished senators who have co-sponsored this motion. Your Excellency, my distinguished colleagues, the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria notes with grave concern the rising cases of suicide, particularly among young Nigerians in recent times, and a significant number of people with suicidal intentions keep their thoughts and feelings as a secret and show no sign that anything is wrong if they don't have anyone to confide in. Further notes that suicidal intentions can occur when someone feels depressed or stressed without assistance or advice from close friends, religious institutions, the government, or any relevant institution, thereby giving them room to feel that they are no longer important in the society. And when they are not able to cope with the overwhelming situation of life, which could be financial problems, death of loved ones, broken relationship, which is very popular among the youth in Nigeria, or serious illness, they choose suicide as an option. Worried, therefore, that in 2019 so far, 5 countries have topped the highest suicide numbers globally, namely Lithuania, 31.9 incidents per 100,000 persons. Russia, 31 deaths per 100,000 persons. Guyana, 29.2 per 100,000 persons. South Korea, 26.9 per 100,000 persons. And Belarus, 26.7 per 100,000 persons. Observes that suicide could be prevented, particularly when family, friends, and close relations of the person contemplating suicide provide support, either by way of encouragement, listening to them, and keeping them safe by staying around them, removing means of committing suicide such as knives, ropes, dangerous drugs, and chemicals, especially sniper. And those that are in position to help, encourage or assist, ignore to do so, thereby leaving them to commit suicide at will. On the 14th of May, 2019, Michael Aroweseye ended his life by suicide at Sonneville Estate, Lokogoma, District, Abuja. It was gathered that the deceased was depressed over certain personal issues. Aisha Omolala, a 300-level student of Ahmadu Bello University's area, took her life in her hostel after complaining of depression. In October 2018, a professor in the Biological Sciences Department of the Federal University of Agriculture, Makurdi, Benue State, killed himself after he had purportedly battled marital issues for a while. Tololope Abodere, who worked in a bank, took his life on 21st November 2018 after he admitted on Twitter to have been plagued by thoughts of suicide for 2 years due to depression. Samuel Elias, 25, a final year student of Department of Religion and Culture, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, allegedly took his life by drinking sniper insecticide. It was gathered that he was depressed over his inability to graduate from the university. Worried that the number of Nigerians taking their lives has assumed a frightening dimension of late, and the government, religious institutions, and other relevant corporate bodies have not addressed the ugly situation in the country, and the situation may continue if not properly addressed. acknowledges that creating adequate awareness on how to control stress and depression by the government, religious institutions, and other relevant corporate bodies, and the establishment of trauma centers across the Federation will go a long way in reducing the rate of suicide in the country. The Senate accordingly resolves, 1, to urge the federal government through the Ministry of Information, National Orientation Agency, and the Ministry of Health to urgently create awareness on how to control stress and depression and establish trauma centers across the Federation. 2, urge the federal government to ban the production, importation, or circulation of sniper insecticide, a product currently used to commit suicide. 3, urge the federal government through the NUC to review the school curriculum and come up with compulsory courses that will enable students place value on their lives and detest suicide. 4, urge religious bodies across the Federation to always preach love, peace, and how to relieve stress and depression amongst members. 5, engage the executive arm on the need to expand the scope and content of the special intervention programs of government and to leverage on extant schemes like the Empower in creating economic opportunities for the vulnerable sections of the population. Excellency, my distinguished colleagues, I so wish, if we wish to do so.
Senator representing Osun East. I second my colleague, Senator Oji, on the issue of suicide rate in Nigeria and all over the world. My main concern is Nigeria, and it's becoming a per minute phenomenon in the whole country. And the Senate, by virtue of good laws, must be able to address the situation before it gets out of hand. In the country today, we have a lot of problem of unemployment that has pushed the young ones into using drugs and even raping. The rape issue we have already discussed as a result of this type of situation. Unfortunately, even in political circle, we have gotten a situation where we are doing some primaries, even in Lagos State. The old director of a bank who dipped his hand in the purse of the bank and went for primaries. When he failed, he just asked his driver to drive straight to Fort Mainland Bridge, begged the driver to stop, and he jumped into the lagoon. A lot of suicide cases have been recorded in the country. Armed robbers alone commit suicide because when they don't have anything to eat, they will want to go back to their creators. Immediately, they commit suicide for employment opportunities for their youth, for our youth, so as to avoid this type of cases.
Thank you, Mr. President, my distinguished and respected colleagues, Senator Albert Bassi, Akwa Ibom Northeast. Mr. President, let me thank my leader, Uchendu, for this motion. And to say that, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, we just debated the motion by Senator Rosoko on the incessant child abuse and child rape. Mr. President, there are different degrees of depression. Some might be as a result of economic downtime. Some might be very personal. Some might be emotional trauma on the basis of injuries, emotional injuries inflicted on our people. But Mr. President, I believe that it is not about canceling. Some level and degree of depression is more than canceling. Is more than canceling can solve. We have talked about the creation of trauma centers. We must address the issue of rehabilitation. Just like people who go into drugs are rehabilitated, a lot of our people die in silence. And in the cause of this degree of emotional trauma, they go into depression, which leads, of course, into all kinds of death. We've had issues like Senator Fauci has stated, people who go by terminal branch and plunge themselves into the lagoon. We've had people who, through other kinds of chemicals, lead to all kinds of deaths. But we believe that as a government, it's not about the ministry. It's not about the government alone. We, as a chamber, we reflect the context of Nigerian people. How many of our senators will spend zonal intervention to educate our people on ways and means of avoiding depression? I believe that we must begin to look at things holistically, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. Therefore, we should add value so that we can actually add value to our people in our various constituencies. Because if we are able to reach out to our people in our various electoral districts and various constituencies, I believe we will reach our people deeper and stronger than government staying in Abuja to educate our people. That's my submission, Mr. President, and I stand by it.
You start by implementation. Senator Matthew Uragide.
Mr. President, my very distinguished colleagues, I'm Senator Matthew Uragide. Our rebellion is a daily occurrence in our society. And looking at the body of this motion, the prime mover or sponsor of this motion and all of us who are supporting have been able to adduce different reasons for this seeming ugly occurrence. But it has come to stay in our society. We have thought that before now, very permissive societies where people could just do anything out of their own freedom. They could kill and they could take their own lives. But of course, in a depressed economy like our own, where things are getting worse and worse every day, the incidence, its occurrence, its pattern, is one tool that is going out of human comprehension and explanation. Mr. President, before now, no doubt that the incidence was far less. How could you explain it? A medical doctor that is gainfully employed, after training gainfully employed, drove his car to the center of the bridge, Eco Bridge, or Terminal Bridge, and plunged into the lagoon. And possible explanations were, of course, put forth by people. How else can you explain that? If it is psychosis or a form of schizophrenia, somebody maybe that is not mentally balanced, was there any medical record to show this? No. So all the reasons adduced here, a few of them that have not been mentioned, I think we need to mention them. Yes, depression, bleak future, no employment, Nothing brings food to the table. Self-medication is not mentioned here. It is now a common pattern that you see a lot of our young people, particularly ladies, who will put drugs inside their purse. And at any point in time, they take them. Most of the drugs you see, what we call anti-anxiety drugs, Lesotan, because of the pattern of use. You could use a Lesotan 1.5 milligrams 2 times a day, and in the night you use 3 milligrams so that it can put you to sleep. People who have sleep disturbances. You could see ladies and young people put Lesotan in their bags just to remain calm. And even the use of the diazepam, like Valium, to say take only at night. People have begun to use these drugs even during the day outside prescriptions. And we are asking, somebody who is fighting anxiety, he has to take these anti-anxiety drugs. It got to the head that regulatory bodies now saw the pattern, because any drug that can cause addiction has to be restricted. It now happened that the drug has to be written off the shelf. Today, Lesotan that was commonly used and dispensed in clinics can no longer be used. So at the point of observation, that certain persons are using drugs outside prescription, particularly the drugs that are very cheap. A lot of persons do not know. In those days when people were taking codeine was sold in patent medicine stores. Codeine could just go through one-step synthesis to get morphine, but nobody knew. And of course, the transformation of the drug itself in the human being, it gets to a point where the intermediate products could just elicit some of these actions. So we need to do a whole lot more. A drug like petidine was used for women in labor, just to kill pain. If a woman was to undergo cesarean section and you need to kill her pain, you will give her petidine. Petidine was just 50 kobo in those days. And the books with which they were being dispensed, you would just write the amount, 50 kobo. Medical doctors were now taking petidine just for them to keep it. Medical doctors for no reason. I want to tell the authority, I had a friend, a medical doctor, a specialist, who was giving petidine to himself. The day he saw me, he said, Matu, do you know I'm now petidine dependent? I said, how could you be doing this? He said, yes. I got hooked on petidine. The dean of the College of Medical Sciences in those days, in one of the teaching hospitals, was taking petidine until the man got hooked on it. And I don't want to tell the story. The same story is this, what you see here. So, the uncontrolled use of medications by individuals, we need to give it very close look. The statistics quoted here, even though we don't have the one that are documented in Nigeria, this could just be a child's play. In a population of about 200 million people, where, of course, the misery index is very high, over 50%, how are you going to control the incidence of suicide? So I think more importantly, and if you look at the pattern, it is even more with the affluent than those that are poverty-stricken. So, Mr. President, I think it's an issue, whatever mechanism or whatever, we are going to provide a solution. The first thing that has to be done is the well-being of our citizens. We need to attend to it. Yes, governments too must take the lead. But in those days when we had religious instructions, where people were closer to God, the incidence of suicide was less. Because just like you kill others, it's an offense before God to kill yourself. Because as the Bible tells us, you are going to hellfire if you kill yourself. You have no right to take your own life. These are instructions that we have to give to our citizens. There's the need for people to be closer to God, in as much as the knowledge that we have is the one that can continually guarantee our lives and continually put us in proper stead in standing with ourselves before our fellow men and before God. If we're able to address these issues, I just believe the part that government has to, perform in providing better lives for our citizens, of course, will not be overblown. It behoves on us to be alive, whether you are poor or whether you are rich, but the point must be made that you preserve your life. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator Anayo.
Rochas, Okorocha, Imo West. Mr. Senate President, I have listened to different contributions Thank you. I said I have listened to different contributions on this subject matter, and I have also made some reflections as to our debates since we started the 9th Assembly. And it seems to me that our pattern of discussion and deliberation seems to be the same. The first time we met here, Mr. Senate President, was on the issue of a young girl detained in Saudi Arabia. It was again an issue of vandalization, tanker falling, funding of primary health centers, rape. And today, and now we're talking about committing suicide. Mr. President, the summary of all these our discussions puts to a pointer that majority of Nigerians are not happy. Our nation is characterized with unhappiness, be it in the political fora, business, legislative, executive, and what have you, families. Why would one want to take his life and commit suicide? Simply because he or she is tired of this life. And I raise my hand to ask the question, but not knowing the procedures in this red chamber, I'm careful that I remain a student for a while. But when the issue of rape was raised by Senator Oko, and the state was mentioned, Kano, I had expected that senators from Kano would have said something on that matter to make me believe that a 6-month-old baby could be raped. Because still now, I'm still imagining that it's not true. But coming to the issue of suicide, many people are committing suicide and some still intending to commit suicide because they lack the ability to express themselves or to share their feelings with anybody. I think we have to revisit the actions we take in this hallowed chamber, because most of the time when people are hot, they would think that going to the police might be a solution. Senator Theology has mentioned Ministry of Health and Orientation, Ministry of Information as a solution. Most people are seeking to where would they go to find happiness. And if you recall, the entire Constitution of America is centered on guaranteeing the happiness of the people. And when a government has failed to guarantee the happiness of people, that government is living short of the expectation. I want to state in this hallowed chamber, Mr. Senate President, that let it be known to all of us that most Nigerians are not happy. And day by day, we're hearing the cases of people taking their life untimely. Our Senate should not be just a discussing Senate, but also provide some level of solution. In all that we have said here, in all our prayers, appears to me as if though we're embarking on academic exercise that might not reflect any practical realities. A step further should be taken to go down and find out what is the causative, what is really the cause, why these people are not happy to the extent that they will take their life and commit suicide. And when you commit suicide, nobody knows the reason why you have committed suicide. So, Mr. Senate President, I think a department should be created to look into this issue. When I did create the Ministry of Happiness in Imo State, it was perhaps the most misunderstood but the most effective ministry in Imo State to address issues of this nature, to address the challenges we have. Because if our policies does not guarantee the happiness of people, then it is a failed policy. And when the people's opinion supersedes that of legislative or executive, a wise government must submit to it. That's what makes for popular government. May I therefore advise, or allow me in the next time to present a proper motion on the urgent need to establish Department of Happiness. And no, start with the Department of Happiness, because in the UK, similar thing had happened. When people were committing suicide because of loneliness, Prime Minister Theresa May established a ministry for loneliness to address this issue. But to our mind, we think once we deal with Ministry of Works, Ministry of Aviation, Ministry of Health, we have dealt with matter of Nigeria. There are some sensitive areas that we must address and provide department or ministry to address this issue. So I will advise Theology, Senator, to expand this your motion, to inculcate a more solution-providing department and ministry to address this issue. When a husband is quarreling with a wife and the house is in pieces, most of the men do not know that the reasons for quarrel might just not be money, but the woman has not been allowed to express herself and speak out her body. In this nation, people are bottled with anger, and we must allow them to express their anger. Even in politics here, this is what the sense of it. People could drive you crazy to the extent that you see injustice ravaging everywhere. Example, you know him, and you know them. So, Mr. Senate President, may I suggest, on a serious note, that whether it be issue of rape, issue of committing suicide, issue of drug, let us create a department to address this issue. Ministry of Health is not linked to that. Police is not equipped for that. Ministry of Information is not equipped for that. That we must get a department where people can go and express themselves and talk to the people. It's counseling, it's guidance, it's orientation, it's everything put together. And that ministry or department must be a department of happiness. I so submit.
But one important thing, Mr. President and the senior colleagues, we need all to be societicians. Ability to watch suicide and make effort to refer them to those centers, whether it's a billionaire or it's a pauper or...
Two important motion this morning that has some relationships. I wanted to talk during the motion on rape. There is one important aspect of our lives. We call it modern life now that we have not been taken care of. The Bible says that if the foundations are weak or bad, what will the righteous do? In most cases, we also fail to note the difference between knowledge and wisdom and maturity. Most of these cases we are talking of today, even though we have some of them or few of them that happens among the elders, but most of them happens among the youths and children. To trace this one to the way we train our children, we don't allow our children to mature naturally nowadays. Most of parents, especially our mothers, don't really allow the children to mature naturally. They rush for education and knowledge alone. So that in most cases, underage are put in schools. I can remember when I was a permanent secretary serving under an essay, my essay's son got admission to one of the universities in America, but he was about 17 years old, not up to 18. That child was not allowed to enter university in America. He has to take that child to South Africa for a media class of 1 year before taking him back to that place. But in Nigeria today, before you note it, a child of 4 years, 5 years is already in primary school, and a child of 14, 13 years, 15 years are in the universities. Some parents will carry Pampers to the university campus with and the beds and beddings. I think the pressure or the burden of maturity and wisdom on the knowledge of our children and our youth is too much. If we only allow our children to grow up maturely before they attain certain positions, they will be able to consider and think of what they will know that life is not a straight graph affairs. And whenever they have an issue, instead of taking suicide as option, they will see other things. But in most cases, these youths, these children, they don't know. I think among other things, there was a lady, very brilliant lady from University of Ife, OAU, Obafemi Awolowo University, because she failed one paper in chemistry, she committed suicide. So also, I have
The song we shook around though.
mentioned that we look at our institutions. Most of our institutions are weak and some are not functional. All these issues we are talking of, there is none that we don't have institutions of enforcement or implementation for in this country. But most of them are not functional or very, very weak. So I want us to go back to our education policy, which stipulates the ages at which our children should enter schools, so that they will match knowledge with wisdom and maturity. Mr. President, thank you. I want to.
Uche Global, for this very important motion. It's important because this motion elicits from us, senators, to discuss the state of our economy. When you discuss an issue as important as suicide, we look at the causative factors. And I think that there are three main causative factors that leads a human being to take his life. Mr. President, I'm addressing the chair. The president is being distracted.
The song is Senator Song continue with your contribution.
There are three causative factors. First, environmental. Second, poverty. And the third one is mental, which deals with the issue of health. If we discuss the issue of suicide as it relates to our country, suicide is a recent phenomenon in our country. Suicide has become very perennial because people have gradually, over the years, become absolutely very, very, very poor in our country. Like I said the other day, if we look at the statistics that are shown off from the Bureau of Statistics, about 71% of our population lives under the poverty line. And life exists just by hope. If you wake up in the morning and you hope that by the evening you will be able to provide for your family, for yourself and your relatives, you keep hoping and life goes on. But in a situation where a person who has gone to school, who have passed through, spent so many years in school, wakes up in the morning and there is no hope that he will find even 1 square meal a day, such a person becomes susceptible to the vagaries of the environment that he lives in, and it can lead to a lot of things, either criminality or even suicide. Environmental issues are issues that also create problem in a society. The countries that he has mentioned, most of them are countries that were former Soviet republic, where people were completely suppressed. And a human being who is suppressed, who can express himself, as was said by Rochas here, has the tendency to go into depression and might take his life or engage in other acts of criminality. Then mental health. This was discussed here comprehensively last week based on the motion that was moved by Senator Tinubu on issues of health. Are we, as a country, addressing issues of poverty, which is very important in this country? And as senators who are elected, and the Constitution of the Federal Republic gives us the power to make laws for the good governance of this country. By extension, it is for us to be able to make laws that will address issues of poverty in this country, so that the issues of anxiety, of people not being able to pay school fees of their children, not able to meet up with responsibilities that are normally theirs, will be taken away from them. And so, like Rocha said, why I will not necessarily subscribe to the creation of Department or Ministry of Happiness, I will also think that the federal government should critically look at creating an agency that deals with issues of poverty and poverty reduction in our country. If we do that, the anxiety that eventually leads people to mental health to the extent that they will take their life will be drastically reduced, and so we'll have less of this. Like I said, if we look at from 1990 to 2000, you never had these perennial issues of suicide. This is a recent phenomenon. And why? 71% of our population is living under poverty. There's bound to be anxiety in the society, and there are bound to be more vices that will come in. Vices such as suicide, criminality, you are talking about rape here. These are all vices that have become very recent in our society. They are not vices that were commonplace in our society in the past. And so let us, Mr. President, as we go deep into our work, let us begin to bring bills that will address issues that touches and concerns the lives of Nigeria, such as poverty. And I think poverty, once we address that, this suicide, rape, and all these issues will be drastically reduced. Mr. President, I so submit.
Senator I.D. Gyang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I.D. Gyang, representing Plateau North. Mr. President, I rise to lend my voice to this very important motion and to say that we have to take a look at the diagnosis as well as the prognosis, and by implication, the causes and the remedies available. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the mover of the motion has elaborately dealt with the issues and the causes that have led to this rising wave of suicide and suicidal tendencies that we are confronted with in the nation. And I want to further say that the economic issue, psychological issues, and of course the influence of harmful illicit drugs are part of the reasons that are propelling this malady. Nigerians are traumatized by economic and psychological circumstances. The unbearable living conditions leaves most of the suicide victims with no alternative to living than taking to the option of suicide. In that regard, we have to look at the means of expanding economic opportunities that will provide gainful employment opportunities for our youths that are unemployed, many of whom have graduated after many years and are still roaming the streets. Mr. President, there is also the issue of terminal health challenges that make persons that have terminal cases consider the options of taking their lives. There is the issue of the legality and morality of whether to allow persons with terminal cases that are living under painful circumstances to take their lives. And in all, it has been said that whatever will drive a rat into fire may be more dreadful than the fire itself. But I think that addressing the causes and expanding economic opportunities will serve as a remedy, particularly for those that are traumatized by the economic situation in the country. I therefore support the prayers that the motion has provided. All the prayers, I endorse them and lend my voice to this very important motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator
President, my name is Senator Adedayo Adeyeye, representing Ekiti South of Nigeria. This is a very complex issue, sir. Suicide has always been with us from the foundation of the earth. We read it in the Bible, and I believe it's also in the Quran. Judas was a disciple of our Lord Jesus Christ. Despite the great monetary gain he made from betraying Jesus, he still committed suicide. It will be a grave mistake if we come to the simplistic view that economic factors are the main causes of suicide. That cannot be the case. Otherwise, how do we explain the fact that the daughter of somebody who was the richest person in the world at one time, I'm talking of Aristotle Onassis, the Greek shipping magnate. He had only one surviving doctor who inherited virtually all the wealth, and yet she committed suicide. And we have had so many cases like that of rich people committing suicide, and yet among the poorest of the poorest, we see people living happily. One of our colleagues here mentioned the other time that at one time CNN carried out a survey worldwide of the happiest people in the world. Despite the fact of our poverty in Nigeria, That was about 15 years ago. We were rated as the happiest people in the whole world then. That is no longer the case now. We were rated as the happiest people, so it was not an economic reason. If it is purely an economic reason, America or Switzerland or Singapore should have been rated as the happiest people in the whole world. It's a complex matter, sir. As long as there will be illnesses, physical and mental, there will always be death. The point is that we do not recognize, we have not given adequate recognition to mental illness in Nigeria. We recognize physical illness. Somebody is suffering from hypertension, somebody has kidney failure, he has malaria, we treat it quickly. In this country, and in most of the developing world, we do not even think that mental illness is a disease which should be given equal attention. It is not recognized. If a person has high blood pressure, it will ultimately lead to hypertension. Hypertension could lead to kidney failure. It could lead to so many other things and ultimately death. Also, when a person is having issues which could be caused by so many factors, not necessarily economic, it will lead gradually into anxiety. Anxiety to depression. Depression to suicide. We don't intervene in all of these stages, and we should have a mechanism for intervention in these stages. I remember when I entered the University of Ibadan in the 70s. One of our professors told us a story. When we were graduating, he said, look, the fact that you have now graduated from this university and you now have a life meet ticket does not mean that you cannot face problems that can even make you to commit suicide. Then he cited the case of a friend of his who had just committed suicide. That friend was a judge. What was the reason? He discovered that while he was so busy, delivering judgment, writing judgments, his gate man had been making love to his wife. And when he discovered it was too much for him to bear, he went into depression and committed suicide. So my recommendation, sir, is that we should pay attention to psychiatric treatment in this country. At the last count, we heard that there are only 250 psychiatrists in Nigeria. That is a ratio of about 1 psychiatrist to 240,000 Nigerians. That is terrible. We need to pay more attention to training mental health workers, mental health professionals, so that they can attend to people before it gets out of hand. When the person begins to attend to have anxiety, he should be able to walk into a place where he will be attended to. But unless a person has entered the marketplace, center of the market, to remove his clothes, to begin to say all sorts of stupid things, we don't think the person has mental health problem. We don't think so. And that is a big mistake. When the person smiles at you, you think it's okay. It may not be okay. The reason why Americans have reduced suicide rates considerably is because of the high number of psychiatric professionals who are attending to people. People check themselves into these clinics when they think that they're having problems. They just simply check themselves in and they are treated. So my recommendation, sir, is that we should pay attention to mental illness, train more mental health professionals, have more clinics all over the place, and carry out serious public enlightenment campaigns to advise people when they feel any anxiety to move into these clinics. Or when you notice any person close to you feeling any anxiety or expressing some kind of behavior which is not too normal, you can easily recommend and take them to those places. Unless we do that, the rate of suicide will continue. If you talk of poverty, poverty will always remain. Poverty has always been with us from the foundation of the world. And there is never going to be a time when there will be no poverty. In any case, poverty is a relative term. In America today, poverty is defined as anybody living below $20,000 per year. That is about almost 8 million naira. Can we define that in Nigeria? So we can't. So it cannot be that poverty is the main reason. The main reason is that, like any other illness, there will be mental problems, and we must attend to this mental problem. Thank you, Mr. President.
Nobody can say this is the only solution to it, and if you do it, it will stop. Because if you look at it this way, you find in the academia professors committing suicide. Somebody committed suicide simply because he has been doing so much
but he has not been recognized. And then he committed suicide. A Vilonia also committed suicide because his company's shares went down. Eventually, he committed suicide. A poor man also committed suicide for lack of food. Then you find students for failing exams committed suicide. Married woman committed suicide and husband also because of some of the problems between themselves. So I think what we have to do here is to ensure that we have a lot of counseling centers all over the place, because there is no one single solution to suicide. And after all, like he said in the Bible, in the Holy Quran, it is said that whosoever commits suicide willingly, then he goes to hell. Now, why should somebody commit suicide? So I think no matter what, there shouldn't be any reason for any person to commit suicide. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Colleagues, Michael Okweyemi Bamidele, representing Ekiti Central Senatorial District. Mr. President, so much has been said, and it was particularly interesting listening to some of our colleagues, especially my brother, Senator Adeyeye, talking about the need for us to pay better attention to issues of mental illness in this country. I totally agree. But Mr. President, I choose to make my own contribution as a social scientist because I believe the issue before us today is not so much about whether whether there should be suicide in this country. I don't think anybody can run away from that, and it happens all over the world. The issue, Mr. President, before us is regarding our concern for a rising case, a rising number of people who are committing suicide. And of course, without prejudice to historical facts being laid at our disposal, I want to say that I identify very prominently with the school of thought that insists that the reason for this increase is a sociological issue, and it calls for a sociological approach. Mr. President, we're talking about rising level of suicide. In a society where poverty is getting consolidated by the day, all manners of things happen. One of them is insecurity, which has become a major issue in this country, and more Nigerians are falling victim of this. Another issue is that of armed robbery. Armed robbery is also on the rise. Also, Mr. President, talk about prostitution. If prostitution were a moral issue or a moral problem, I believe our churches and our mosques have said enough to have resolved this issue. But because it's a sociological problem, it's on the rise. It takes some level of being debased, Mr. President, for a good-looking, well-educated lady to stand by the road at night, waiting for Godot, waiting for a man she never met in her life, in this perverse society, when she cannot even say for certain what will become of her. But she has to do that in most parts for economic reasons. The society might look down on her, but she's probably a breadwinner somewhere. It is a sociological problem. And Mr. President, it is said that philosophers have interpreted the world. What is important and what is left is to change it. And if we are going to change our world in this regard, we are talking about rising level of depression. That is the whole essence. And that is where the sociological approach comes in. Mr. President, poverty is one issue that is confronting us on the face, and we must develop as a government the political will to attack this menace. And in doing this, Mr. President, I want to say that as a Senate, as an institution that is in charge of appropriation, our own political will must be of course, exhibited from the level of us as a National Assembly interfacing with the executive arm of government to say it's no longer going to be business as usual. What is the level of our budget? What is the percentage of our budget that is devoted to youth development, that is devoted to employment generation, that is devoted to women development? What is without employment, without agriculture, yes, what is the percentage of our budget that is devoted to agriculture? And then take it beyond the level of agriculture to developing agro-allied industry. If we are not talking about industrialization, we are not talking about other things, this depression will continue to be on the rise. And that is the sociology. We must understand the political economy of this whole situation and how to go about it. And that's why I want to say that, yes, very interesting motion, very good motion, Mr. President. But beyond issues of public awareness, beyond quoting the Bible and the Holy Quran, we must address the issue of poverty. And this is very crucial. Otherwise, this whole debate, this whole attempt at resolving this problem will be a highway to nowhere. Yes, we must pay attention to issues of mental illness in this country, but the issue of poverty must be addressed. And this, at the end of the day, is what will actually show the sincerity on our part as leaders and as a government. Section 14 of our Constitution defines the whole essence of government. The primary responsibility is protection of life and property. And the two are linked together. The two are threatened by poverty. You can't talk of protection of property or protection of life where the right to life is not even guaranteed, because people go to bed without being sure of what they will give to their children for breakfast. We can't run away from this. What does freedom of expression or freedom of speech mean to an illiterate who did not have an opportunity of going to school? What ideas is he going to express? These are issues that we must address, and we must see the link between, the two. And Mr. President, I want to urge this Senate that we must come to a conclusion that it's not going to be business as usual. In the issue of budgeting, we'll have to address, a lot of these issues that we are talking about. We must industrialize, we must create employment, we must give agriculture a facelift. And unless these things are addressed, we will not have started addressing the real issues. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Christopher Ekpeong. Then Senator.
But, Mr. President, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to join my distinguished colleagues. And while we were moving this motion, we had enumerated so many nations of the world that is attributed to poverty. I had listened attentively, but I had thought that the distinguished senates here and senators would have also prescribed the modus operandi, the remedy to poverty. Mr. President, how would somebody go to the bank and collect money to establish a small and medium industry because of the call by the federal government that we must all be participants in driving the economy of the nation, whereas the infrastructure is not available, road not available to convey goods and services and the products, power not available, then it collects the resources, still not available for production, and then it goes to the bank, collects resources, and it has a timeline for him or her to repay the resources back to the bank, and then it comes in with this non-availability of infrastructure. He couldn't move forward. The resources gone under the rain. Why will he not commit suicide? He will commit suicide. He will commit suicide. One, because of ego. Ego. He has a safe ego. The ex-team is gone. He's collected money. His family reputation will be brought into disrepute, so he will commit suicide. So the first fundamental issue that we have to do is to ensure that we urge the federal government and the agencies available
to ensure that the requisite infrastructural facilities are available to address the issue of poverty. Again, the issue of suicide, sir, like I said, people have enumerated here, Senator Rogers Okorocha Owele has enumerated, the movers have enumerated, and all others. Sir, we need a concrete information, a concrete way, a solution. We talked here, we could not say that we should, Nigeria, we don't know even our population. I read yesterday, Saudi Arabia, with a population of 28 million people, would the same capacity like Nigeria, generating oil, producing oil, he's caring for his people. Nigeria has not made a concrete arrangement to care for his own people, even with the numerous resources that is gotten from oil. South America provides for the people. Great Britain provides for the people, for the vulnerable, through what they call security, social security. What social security have we put on ground? We are talking of the endpoint. I commend the president of Nigeria for the endpoint. That was one of the things that made me to deviate, to think about him that as a worthy leader for Nigeria. Because endpoint is also a medium of salvaging the vulnerables. So we should go further, sir, to ensure that we lay a ground norms, to ensure that we have a medium of salvaging the vulnerable, the poor in our society, and then you think of the other ones, the elders that have finished serving Nigeria for 35 years, most of them did not have access to the resources like others, and they come back home. We look at them with disdain, without thinking that they have given service to Nigeria. Through either proper medical, activities to take care of these ones that have come out and have no resources to take care of their health situations. So we must make provision. Call on the federal government to ensure that health care is made not just free, but more importantly, executed to be free for the poor, for the elders, and for those who have served Nigeria. That's what we have to do. We have to ensure that poverty is gradually taken away by introduction of social security. Mr. President, I join my colleagues that have looked at this motion as very apt to ensure that all the prayers requested here and possible for amendment is made and agreed and approved by this honorable Senate. Thank you.
Prayer 3, urge the federal government through the NUC to review the school curriculum and come up with compulsory courses that will enable students to place value on their lives and detest suicide. Those in support of this prayer say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 4, urge religious bodies across the Federation to always preach love, peace, and how to relieve stress and depression amongst members. Those in favor of this prayer say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. And prayer 5, engage the executive arm of government on the need to expand the scope and content of the special intervention program of government and to leverage on extant schemes like the Empower in creating economic opportunities for the vulnerable sections of the population. Those in support of this prayer say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Additional prayer, Senator Ayo Akin-Yalura. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Additional, those against say nay. The ayes have it. Senator Chief